Okay? Come on. One more group. Great. I mean, this works really well. Usually we spend like 10 minutes asking people to find their group members, but this worked pretty well. Yeah, so congrats. So this is basically your development team. Like you just formed your development teams, and now together with other colleagues, you are going to work on features in a exemplary system. Okay. So once we have the groups, quick agenda. What we are going to discuss today. So first, we are going to do a short introduction into the development process, like how we work inside our company, and basically how you are going to work in your groups, in your development teams. Then we are going to do something that we call feature interrogation. Like as a development teams, you are going to work on features, and the first thing that you can do for a feature is interrogate it, like become a feature detective. Like your job will be to find out as much as possible about the feature and use that knowledge for future development. The next thing is gonna be about perspectives. So you're going to use different perspective, look at the feature that you are going to work on, and try to find problems with that feature, trying to find risks, try to avoid potential bugs after the feature is implemented. And we are going to finish with something that we call quality attributes. So basically, try to understand what really matters when it comes to quality in your organization for the feature that you are going to implement, and just dissect those quality attributes and think about things that can go wrong with a feature and take those quality attributes under consideration. And we are going to do a summary of the whole hands-on session. Usually we spend like full day doing the session because there are so many techniques that we can go through, but we have only like 1 hour and 30 minutes, so we had to cut the scope. We are not going to cut the quality, of course. We are just going to cut the scope, and instead of doing all the techniques, all the different exercises, we just decided to go with 3 exercises. So the first 15 minutes, and this is basically now, I'm going to spend just discussing quality process. Then we are going to have first exercise that you are going to do together in your groups. And this is basically the interrogation of feature. Then the next 30 minutes will be spent on doing one of perspectives that we can do for a feature. We call that physical perspective. I'm also going to mention other perspectives that you can use, but we will not have time to go through them. And we will have 20 minutes to go with quality criteria and 5 minutes to do the summary. So we have really tight schedule. There won't be any breaks. Sorry for that. And as you can see, I speak very quickly, and this is not going to change. So if you have any questions, you can do Slido, or you can ask me those questions after the presentations. Probably we won't have time to answer questions right away. But yeah, this is how it is. Cool. So how the development process looks like in our company. So the first thing that you need to know is that we don't have testers in our company. We don't have quality assurance engineers, or however you call them. We just have engineers. And those engineers are basically contributors to our product source code. This is like very simplistic representation of our development process. Once we know what we want to deliver, once we have that thing split into stories, a story is picked up by engineer, and the engineer starts working on the story, right? And the first thing that engineer does is something we call QA kickoff. This is basically a quality assurance kickoff, let's say. So the idea is that the engineer who picks up a story, who assigns a story to them, is looking for another pair of eyes and discusses the story with that other person. Some teams have people enroll quality assistants. Some teams don't have that role. Some teams need to pair with other developers. So you have developers pairing with other developers doing QA kickoff. And basically what you do during QA kickoff, you are going through a story and trying to come up with all the potential risks related to that story. Like really think what can go wrong. Like what you are going to change in the application. Are you going to introduce some new flows into applications, some UI, etc.? Are you going to change what kind of code you are going to change? What kind of services? Are there any inherited risks in those services? And basically you are thinking about all the things that potentially you are going to do during development and list all the risks in something that we call testing notes. So testing notes are just like a bullet points of all the risks, all the things that you should focus on during development, and also all the acceptance tests that you need to run in order to confirm that story is implemented. Because like how we do software development, we basically say that if you build something, you also test it, right? So there is no other person who is going to test something for you. Like if you are going to build something, you are going to implement something, you will also be responsible for testing it. So the idea of doing QA kickoff is to get some extra ideas what should be tested from the other person that you are pairing with during this stage. In cloud applications, we also run cloud applications, cloud services. We even go a step further, and if you build something, you run it, right? So you deploy it to production, you monitor it on production, you confirm that there is a value from something that got implemented, like users are using this feature that you implemented, etc. Okay, so once the QA kickoff is done, we have implementation, right? Like the standard thing. You're changing some code, you're changing some configuration, you are implementing new services if they are necessary, and once the implementation is done, we have code review, right? So you have people in your team doing review of your code, of your changes, and once they approve all the changes, there is another activity that we run, and it's called QA demo. And the idea is very similar to QA kickoff, but now you have your change implemented in your product, right? So you can spawn your application, you can go to a page, you can do a request call to REST API and see how things work. And this is a chance for you to maybe spot something that you didn't think about during QA kickoff, right? Because in QA kickoff we don't have that thing built. We are just thinking about it, like how it could work, how it could change our application. But during QA demo, we have that thing working, so we can look at it and see if we missed something, and also see how well it fits into application, into the product, etc. Are there any other problems that we missed? And this is also quite important step. Sometimes, if we have many developers, many engineers working on similar area, we decide to run something that is called blitz. So if we if team thinks that there might be potentially integration problems once everything is merged and everything ends up on master, in order to avoid those integration problems, we are going to run exploratory session. Like every team member, every developer is going to do exploratory testing, and we call that session a blitz. Right. So this is how the things work on story level, right? But we found out that those kickoffs that we are having between developers are so beneficial that we could do them even before we have stories, right? Like in order to have stories, you already need to know what you want to implement and how you want to implement it, right? You already have some kind of plan. You already have an epic or some other thing split into all the different steps that need to take place in order for that thing to be realized, to be implemented in your product. But maybe we could do a kickoff just on idea. Let's say that we have an idea, right? So we have like some kind of idea of a feature that we want to introduce into our product. We have some rough idea of what we want to achieve, how we want to change our product, what kind of expectations we have towards results, objectives, etc. how users are going to change their behavior, etc. But we also only have like rough idea what the feature is. But still, we can do a feature kickoff, so something similar to QA kickoff, but instead having just 2 developers or 2 engineers talking to each other, we have more people involved. We have engineers who are going to work on a feature, we have product managers, we have designers, we have people from support. So basically everyone who is going to be affected by the new thing at any given point of time, right? Like during development, one is developed and shipped to production. Once user start finding some kind of problems and ask support for help, every single person who is going to be affected by that new thing is taking part in feature kickoff. But the idea is very similar to QA kickoff. Like we are trying to find things that we don't know about feature, like what we missed, what are the unknowns, what are the unknown unknowns, and find out as many answers to those questions that we come up with during this session as possible. And basically, we are going to do a feature kickoff today. So we have some rough idea what we want to implement in our product, what kind of change we expect from that feature, and we are going to run feature kickoff, and you are going to use a deck of cards to run feature kickoff. Yeah, because very often it's quite hard to drive those kind of meetings. Like you are operating on very high level of abstraction, you have very rough idea what a feature is, and you need to somehow use techniques for a group of people who are going to help those people better understand what a feature really is and what is relevant for the feature implementation. So those cards that you are going to use, there are 3 categories of cards in the deck. The first category is, I think, 7 or 6 cards used for the interrogation of feature. Those are like basic questions that you can always ask, and you can use those cards to find out more about feature, to find out what are the risks behind feature implementation. But you can also use those cards for chit chat. Like if you have a problem talking to another person, just take those cards, because those cards are great source of questions that you can ask the other person that you are talking to, right? I mean, I heard so many times during a craft conference that engineers have problems talking to other people. So if you have really this kind of problems, you can also take those cards and use them to talk to people. But we are going to use them to find out more about feature and risks related to that feature. The second part of the deck is for quality attributes. So inside our company, we have things that we really care about, right? So we have we really care about performance, security, this kind of stuff, and we put those attributes as a card, right? Just to remind every single engineer who is working in our company that there are things that we really care about, and there are also risks related to those attributes that you can look up by taking a card and just reading the other side of a card, and maybe it will give you some idea what can go wrong in your context as you are implementing a feature. And there are also like a third set of cards, and they are going to be used during perspectives. Like once you look at a feature from different perspectives, we have 4 cards here. They basically are just physical representation of CRUD, right? So this is basically telling you, when you use those cards, that you can look at your feature from data perspective, right? Like data flows through your feature, it gets modified, it gets created, etc., etc. And those cards remind you that you can use, like you can look at your feature from that perspective, from a data flow perspective. I mean, right now those cards can be kind of abstract, like how to use them, etc. That's why we have exercises. So hopefully you will see how they can be beneficial during very early stage of development, and how they can help you understand and find problems before they are coded and committed into master. Okay, so the first technique that we are going to, or you are going to do is interrogation. So basically, as I said, we are going to become a detective, use cards, like the first 7 cards, in order to find out as much as possible about feature that you are asked to implement, right? So you will get a sheet of paper that describes the feature, and you will spend some time together in a group to find out as much as possible about the feature as possible. And we do that in order to avoid this kind of situation, where you, at the end of sprint or however you work, you end up with something that works, and it's even like implemented according to best practices, but completely doesn't make sense. Like, who would ever say that this makes sense? Like, this doesn't make sense. And very often, we find ourselves implementing features that are implemented correctly. Like, they do exactly what they were expected to do. And they are implemented even like the right way. Like, we have maintainable codes behind those features, but they made no sense. And once they reach production, no one is using them. So we are spending quite a lot of time during the interrogation part to find out what are the risks related to that feature, but also what this feature really is all about, like why we are implementing it, and maybe there are other ways we can address some business concerns than implementing this particular feature this particular way. So how do you interrogate a feature? So I said that there are 7 cards, but I lied, there are 6 cards. So there are those 6 cards representing 6 basic questions. The idea is that with those questions, you can derive any question that you can ever ask, right? So on the first side of those cards, you have those basic questions, and on the other side, you have some ideas what kind of questions you can derive from those basic questions in the context of software development, like what kind of more detailed questions you can ask. And the idea is to take those cards, go through them in a group or individually, and try to force yourself to ask questions related to a particular category that makes sense for a feature. And there are 2 reasons that we do that. The first reason is probably there is something that we don't know, right? So just articulating those unknowns as questions helps because maybe there is a person inside your group that knows the answer, right? And I said that during feature kickoff, we have people like engineers, architects, designers, support engineers, etc. So very likely there is a person who already knows an answer, or maybe there isn't. So that's great because you already uncovered something that is unknown. And the question now is this unknown so high priority unknown that it even blocks your feature delivery? If it is, then that's bad, but maybe it isn't and it can be treated as a risk. The other reason why you ask questions and why you come up with questions, even if you know answer to those questions, is to make sure that everyone in the group who is going to be involved in feature implementation has the same answer, right? So you need to be in line with everything that is related to feature. So for instance, if you are working on creating users, right? Like let's say that this is like very basic feature that you are going to work on. Maybe each of you in a group have some rough idea how the user is going to be identified, right? But if you are not going to share your understanding how user is going to be identified, different people in your group may have different ideas, right? And maybe those ideas are inlined, but maybe they are not. And during development, you will find out that basically you took some wrong assumptions, and those assumptions basically resulted in bugs that got discovered very late in the process. Okay, so how do you use those cards and how do you interrogate feature? So let's say that, and we are going to use this example just to show you how every single technique works. Let's say that you are going to implement a new feature in your system that allows users to pick their avatars, right? So you have a system that allows users to pick their avatars, and they can select the file, or they can choose from already available system avatars. So with these cards that you have, you can ask two questions. Like the first one is derived from what, and the question that you can derive from what is what kind of extensions are supported by this feature. Because I know that we used to have a problem with SVG files. We used to have security vulnerability in our system because we used to take SVG files from our users, and the question is, should we allow users to submit or to upload SVG files? The other question that you can come up with is related to where. Like we know that we have application available for web and application available for mobile, and should we give access to change user avatar in those both places? Or maybe we could only say that you can change avatars if you are in the web application, and we are not going to support mobile applications because we have cache synchronization problems, and this is the way that we want to avoid them. Once you come up with those questions in a group, like 99% of those questions will be answered right away, because there is probably a person who knows answer to your questions. But there will be 1% of questions that no one has answered to, right? And this 1% of questions that you will come up with, there is no answer to. This is the value of this exercise, because those questions would come up probably at the later stage during development, and someone would need to find an answer. And it would be nice if you have, if when you have this kind of question, you find a person who knows the answer. But very often we are just making assumptions and trying to answer those questions ourselves. So this is a great case for not going with assumptions, but rather flashing out questions that we don't know answer to, and just tracking those questions as risks, and use those risks during feature development. Okay, so this is the feature that you are going to work on in groups, right? So let's say that we have a system and we want to change it a bit. Like we already have a capability of creating users, and those users can be assigned to applications, right? But now we want to make administrators work a bit easier. So instead of creating a single user, we want administrators to be able to create up to 3 users, right? So administrator can open a pop-up and put details of up to 3 users. And once they do that, they are redirected to another pop-up. And this other pop-up allows administrators to assign seats to applications for those users that got created, right? So it seems like very easy feature. So the first exercise for you is to interrogate the feature. And let me just, okay. Right. So we are going to give you a specification of the feature. We are also going to give you cards that you are going to use to come up with as many questions as possible. And the idea is for you to individually go through the specification, right? And you have like 3 minutes for that. Then in a group, discuss what kind of questions you would like to ask. Like let's say that you have access to a person who knows every single answer to every single question, right? And in the group, you will need to pick 5 questions that you think are very, very valuable for the feature, but also questions that give you competitive advantage over other groups, right? So you need to pick up unique questions, because we are going to do some gamification here. So once you have those questions, and let's say that you need to come up with 3 questions, right? So you need to come up with 3 unique questions. We are going to do round table, and every single group is going to like share their questions, and the group who has the most unique questions wins. Okay? Is everything understood? Cool. So let me just give you a specification and card. So one thing, usually when we do this exercise, we are going around the groups because like you probably have a lot of questions, right? So instead of just like writing those questions down, we are trying to answer them, right? Because like what happens during feature kickoff is that once you have a question, you are raising it right away. You are not waiting and writing down all the questions because it's not a competition of writing as many questions as possible. It's a competition of gaining as much knowledge as possible. So once you have a question, you're asking this question, and basically the idea is that if you are getting answer, probably this answer is gonna create another question, right? So this is like iterative exercise of asking questions. Unfortunately, we are not able to go around you, so you will need to come up with questions and select those 3 questions that you think are very unique, are very important for the feature, and give you a competitive advantage over other groups, right? Because remember, there is a gamification thing here. Okay. I see that you already have quite a lot of questions. Now it's time to just pick those 3 that give you advantage, right? So you need to spend a minute, 2, and pick 3 questions that you think the other group didn't ask. It's 1 minute to pick 3 questions. Okay, do you have 3 questions? On, everyone. 3 questions, everyone? Cool. Okay, who wants to start? Who wants to start? Yeah, okay, go on. I will give you a mic.
So our questions are, why don't we reverse the flow so we discover the number of licenses left before we assign more people than we have license left? The other one is, what happens if you have too few licenses? Who gets the license? Is it like from the top to bottom? And the last one is, why not use a CSV file upload to save even more time instead of putting just 3 usernames?
Yeah, those are good questions, and even a suggestion. So anyone had a question related to not having enough seats for created users? Because yeah, there was a group. Any other group had similar question than this one? Okay, okay. So instead of repeating questions that you already heard, just say the questions that are unique, right? So what about you? There you go.
We are asking why is it 2 pages instead of 1?
Okay.
And yes, and how could the administrator undo or handle error at the end?
Right. Yeah.
And where is the tier? Where can we set up the tier? Is it assigned 1 by 1 or
right
or for the group?
Yeah. Anyone had a similar one? Okay. Okay, I will try to answer those questions, but first let's hear all of them. Okay, here, this group. What are your questions?
What happens if the users already exist in the system?
Right. What does it even mean? Our user already exists. Like, what identifies user? Like, what do you think? Right, yeah, it is. But this is something that you can derive from like hearing a question.
Email address,
Then your
maybe.
like brain is working. Okay.
And one other, what happens if we click the cancel button and why we don't have a cancel button in the first?
Right. So there is already like clearly a bug in the specification itself, in the mockups, right? Yeah. And we also cannot cancel, I think, the first step, right, or the second. Yeah.
And
Okay.
this third one is already here.
Okay. Thanks. Cool.
Yeah, what happens when a user is uploaded again, which exists in the system?
Right.
What happens if we enter the same user multiple times?
Right.
Two
yeah.
times, for example.
Okay, what should happen, or should we communicate with the users if we type their email there? So, do we need to validate the email address?
Yeah, that's also something interesting, like interesting question, because you can specify email, right? So it should be used for something, but it's really unclear what it's used for. And this is a nice question to better understand why we are putting email. And I'll answer that, but later on stage. Okay.
Yes, but the question is if we need to send the email just to validate that the email exists, and
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
And the last question we have is how long the name we can put into the entry? How many words?
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Okay, so next group.
Could you read the question?
Yeah. Three. Only three.
Do we choose?
The most unique.
Okay, what are the platforms in which this will be used? I would say, what is the business of the whole context? Like, I mean, it depends if we are doing it for a web store or for a healthcare business. And okay,
Okay.
it's mine, so.
Come on, you don't have any questions? Everything is
yeah,
understood?
Maybe I ask the first question, why can we only ask 3 questions if we have so many good questions?
Yeah.
We want to
yeah,
deliver
because,
a good user story.
Because like you have, like it's not like we are running those kind of meetings for hours or days. Like it's just 1 hour. So we really need to focus on the most important things.
Okay,
some
and then you
questions can be
still build a
derived.
crappy feature because you haven't answered all the rest?
Yeah.
Okay. What type of application do we develop? Is it a desktop application, mobile application, or web application?
This is a web application.
How does the admin log in?
Right? Okay.
How much time does the admin want to save?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. This is yeah. I will get back to the question later. But yeah, cool. Okay.
Okay, we have more generic question about validation. So, what are the validation criteria?
Mm-hmm.
The next one is, what are the tiers of licenses?
Right.
And how can we change, and can we change the access of existing users?
Okay. Yeah. So just to summarize that, like, thank you all for the questions. Like, unfortunately, I couldn't answer them right away, but this is normally what we do, and this is normally what happens during feature kickoff. Like, you are answering questions right away, but you heard a lot of different questions, like questions related to, for instance, like some input validation, like what kind of validation, etc. But you also heard questions related to how we are going to measure value from a feature. Like I told you that we are trying to minimize the time administrators spend on creating users, right? But the question is like, what kind of expectations we have for this feature? Like, how much time we think this is gonna save administrators' time, right? And this is also a good idea to ask those questions during future kickoff, because we are probably gonna implement some kind of analytics in the feature in order to prove that this feature is successful. What I can tell you about this feature is that in the system we can have many applications. Those applications can have different licenses, and those licenses can have like various number of seats, right? So there aren't like the tiers can change, right? So you can have different tiers. That question that the first group raised, like what's gonna happen when you go to the second screen and there aren't enough licenses, right? Then probably this will spawn a discussion about the API that is underneath and is used by the web application, right? Like, do we, for instance, assign seats to users in batch, or do we need to sequentially assign application licenses to every single user that we create? And this is also probably gonna create another question, like, is it a transaction where we are creating users and then assigning application access in the same transaction, or do we have two separate transactions in place? And in this system, you probably would find out, those are two separate transactions. And this is creating more problems that you are basically uncovering by asking questions during feature kickoff and finding answers to those questions. One more thing. I said that based on analytics, we noticed that administrators create up to 3 users. But there was nothing about administrators licensing those 3 users, right? There was also only about like creating users. So why we decided to create users and give them access to applications? This is something that this is an idea that someone had in mind, but it's not like there is no evidence that it would be beneficial based on the data that we have. So this is also something that we probably could track once the feature is implemented on production with analytics. Okay. Cool. So as you can see, many questions, many answers. Basically, after the first part of feature kickoff, we have some more or less better understanding what the feature is, what is expected from it, why we have email address instead of, for instance, some username, because we are sending that email to the user, and that user needs to confirm the email got received and sets password for user account, etc. And now we can do the second exercise. Basically, look at the feature from different perspectives. And what I mean by different perspectives. First, we have those 4 cards in the deck that remind us that we have that we can look at feature, in this case from data perspective. Like probably like on those different screens we have different data. That data flows, gets modified, etc. And this is those cards are just to remind you that you sometimes need to change how you look at things and look at those things from different perspectives. So what kind of perspectives we usually do? Like we have 3 of them. The first one, and this is the one that we are going to do, is physical perspective. So basically we are trying to understand what kind of components are going to take part in the feature. Like what kind of services, what kind of databases, what kind of protocols are going to be used in order to create users and assign applications to those users. So this is one of the perspectives that you can create, that you can make. It's a physical perspective. The other perspective is logical. So basically we are looking at the feature from domain perspective. like what kind of actors we have that are going to use the feature. In our case, it's administrator, but it's also user. User can be a logged-in user, a user that already exists, etc., a user who is waiting for email, etc. And we are trying to come up with as many use cases for that user and look for potentially conflicting use cases, like how one user can affect another one, how one actor can affect another actor, and what kind of controls we have or should have in our feature in order to avoid those kind of conflicts or react to those kind of conflicts. And the third perspective, and this is the perspective that I like the most, it's looking at the feature from activity point of view. So, for instance, you have some kind of triggers. You have actors who act on those triggers, and you have some kind of events that take place, and you have actors communicating those events up and between each other. And like you can look at the feature from every from a time perspective, like what kind of communication is going on, who is exchanging messages, what triggers this communication, what is really required for a feature to be done. Like, for instance, what is the critical path communication, what is something that can be deferred to a later stage, etc. And this is an activity perspective. So you're going to do physical perspective of that feature. So basically look at the feature from every single part that is involved in the feature, every single component, whether it's a service, web application, whatever, that is involved in the feature. So how does it look like? So let's get back to the example of a feature, basically like having avatars for users. Underneath, we have several pieces that are involved in delivering this feature, right? We have two ways of accessing application. We have a native Android application. We have a web application that can be accessed from desktop, PC desktops, or PC browsers, desktop browsers, or mobile browsers. This web application communicates with content delivery network. It also communicates with Gravatar. This is external source of user avatars. And both Android and web applications talk to user management service. And basically, user management service is responsible for storing avatars for users. And the user management service takes users from LDAP and also has like its own database that is used for caching. And also, as you can see in the screen, we also have Android application that has its own cache and basically caches the user avatars on a device. So once you have this kind of basic understanding of what is involved when it comes to physical things and what we need to work together in order to this feature be available, you can start finding potential problems with those components. Like what's going to happen if one component is not available, or do we really need to have this kind of architecture? Maybe we can change something. Also start asking questions like what kind of API we have available, how we are going to use that API, are there any kind of problems related to that API? Okay, so in order to do the physical, let me just skip. In order to do the physical perspective for our feature, you need to have some kind of understanding how does the architecture of our system looks like. And usually you already have that understanding because you've been working with the system, or maybe if you haven't, there is probably architect taking part in the feature kickoff, so you can always ask them what they know about the system architecture. But for the purpose of this exercise, we are going to give you like one sheet of paper description of the architecture, and the idea is for you to go through the specification try to visualize what you read, right? Like what is how the architecture looks like. What are the moving parts that are going to be involved in creating users and assigning users to applications, and also try to come up with problems with that architecture, like what kind of problems you see and what kind of problems you expect during development, and also once the development is finished and the feature is in production, available to users. Okay? And you have 3 minutes to read the specification, 50 minutes to work in group and visualize the architecture. And as part of the visualization, think about potential problems, something that you would like to raise during feature kickoff, because you expect that there might be problems later in the development or once the feature ends up on production. And we have 7 minutes to summarize the exercise. Okay? Fortunately, we don't have that much time, so you have 2 more minutes. You don't need to complete the architecture, but as you read it through, you probably have some questions and you probably see already some risks. So just focus on them, like note them down somewhere, because we are going to discuss them. Okay. Does anyone see any kind of problem with this architecture? Like, expect any kind of issues that can affect user creation and assignment to application? Yes, you said yes. What kind of problem?
So one thing we have, it's like email, third-party email provider is off, and what happens then? And obviously, what if any of those things like user management service is off and queuing and stuff like this gets blocked, and then session timeout, so security issues, like you have token from one of those database, and session gets too long because one is unavailable. Then what happens next? So, something on this line.
Sure. Anyone else wants to share their problems? What kind of problems they see with this architecture and how can it affect the feature?
We could have a denial of service attack at the authentication server. We can run into email issues, like the email server is not responding or the mailbox of the user is full, so he can never validate his account. Maybe also some SQL injection attack if he chooses a password with whatever quotes inside, or I don't know.
Just to give you a bit more context, so we run this exercise in order to find more problems that we don't see just by analyzing specification, right? Like if you look at the feature from different perspectives, like what are the components involved, we can uncover more problems. And for instance, like this problem with email service, that's also why we have people from support during feature kickoffs, because they probably will tell you that there is a slight chance that emails won't be delivered, or emails will end up in spam, right? And you need to somehow react to this kind of situation. First of all, you need to know that this kind of situation happened, so you need to put in place some kind of tracing or anything like that, and you need to put in place some kind of retry mechanism that will resend email or have some other option to verify user, right? And if you won't look at the underlying architecture, you probably won't see this kind of problem. If you want invite a person who on daily basis fights with this kind of problems, you probably also miss that problem. So first thing, like we are trying to invite as many people from different roles as possible to get different ideas of what can go wrong, and also increase the scope of what the feature really is. But also we look at the feature from different perspectives in order to find different problems. You can have a problem with the queue, like how messages are delivered, in what kind of is there kind of synchronization between messages or not? This may cause a problem, and those are the kind of problems that you can see by doing a physical perspective. If you do activity perspective and try to put on a whiteboard all the different events that need to take place in order for user or administrator to create 3 new users and assign, let's say, 3 applications, and you see that, for instance, the API doesn't support batching, but you need to, for every single user, do a request, then you will have like a whole whiteboard taken by communication going back and forth, and this is like a red light for you saying that we need to change something in the API in order to deliver the feature properly. If you look at the feature from the actor's perspective, you probably will uncover that there are applications and there are administrators. You can have multiple administrators. Those administrators can disable applications, so you may end up in a situation when you are assigning users to applications that is being disabled by another application administrator. You can have a situation where both administrators create the same users, and what will happen then? So like those kind of perspectives, and unfortunately we only had a chance to try one, help you find out more different kind of problems that probably you missed by just reading specification. Okay, now about quality attributes.
So last but not least, quality attributes. And quality attributes list different quality criteria like usability, security, platform, or operations. And why we need them? Because they assist in designing tests. So tester or developer isn't focused only on functional testing. And this is also important because by considering different kinds of criteria, help you discover essential problem area. And each of areas covered by card can be thought of as potential risk. We have 2 sets of these quality attributes. First is stop us, and the second version is extended by 1 card for analytics. And in our set, we have cards like stress, time, operations, platform, usability, security. And going back to the previous example, how we can use the simple cards for our feature. So we can use the card stressed and ask about how we are going to handle large avatars. Is there any maximum size set? We can use cards time and ask, what if we change avatar in web application? Would the cached avatar on mobile get invalidated? We can also use cards like operations and ask what will be the default avatar for users imported from LDAP, or can be avatar restored or backupped. We can use cards platform, and we can think about, do we want to support mobile browser or Android or iOS? And also we can use finally the card security and ask about, do we want to support SVG file? And last, it's usability. That will be also like what is the default avatar from new users or from users from imported from some other service. And next exercise will be you will use those cards to ask new questions for our administration panel feature, and now you have the full picture of this feature. You know what are the business requirements and also what is the architecture. So in next exercise, you can use both sets, like the stop ask cards or this extended with analytics cards. You will spend 3 minutes to familiarize with the cards, and later we will have 7 minutes to identifying crucial attributes with these cards. And later you will choose the most interesting and the most unique risk, and you will share with other groups.
Yeah, you already have the cards, right?
Yeah.
So you already have the cards. The reason why we decided to go with security, time, performance, etc. is because we noticed that those kind of categories of problems are most frequently happening for our applications. So this is just a reminder for everyone who works with our products that potentially something can go wrong with every single category. And if you go through the cards, read the other side of each card, you will get better understanding what can go wrong, and maybe you will come up with a new kind of problems that may happen during development given the feature and the architecture. So just go through the cards and try maybe to come up with new ideas. Yeah. Okay. Any new problems based on the attributes that you just read?
So we were wondering how can we actually measure the speed increase?
Right.
From
Yeah, this comes from analytics, right?
analytics, yeah.
There is a good reason why we decided to put analytics into those cards, just to improve the way we measure success of our features. There was a point of time when we started becoming more and more data driven company, and this is still a card that reminds people to always come up with some kind of metrics that we are going to use to measure success. And this is not a trivial task, like how you are going to measure potential saved time by administrator. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else can come up with something they would like to address? Okay.
We were also wondering what happens if 1 out of the 3 users aren't created, then the whole batch fails, so that's degrading usability.
Right.
Probably.
Yeah. The question is even if anyone will be notified that one user wasn't created. Like there is an assumption that the API will fail, but maybe it won't. Maybe it will fail like silently. Maybe it will create 2 out of 3 users, and no one ever will learn that the third user wasn't created. Or if it does, like we don't have done any kind of mock-ups that show how we should react for this kind of situation. So this is also something that we could discuss with designer how should be addressed. Okay, I think that there is also an idea there.
Our question is, how can we handle the administrator concurrency? I mean, if one of the administrator just set up the username and go the next tab, but it goes something lunch or something else, and what happens if the licenses run out?
Right. Yeah. So one thing, like we are not trying to find solutions to every problem that we uncover during feature kickoff. Very often we just end up with a list of open questions that need to be addressed somehow, and depending on the severity of those questions, we either postpone feature development, we meet with people who we need to discuss to get answers, etc., or we start feature development and during feature development try to answer those questions that we couldn't answer during feature kickoff. So definitely there is a problem that you see with concurrent administrators creating users and assigning access to applications. And potentially there can be a case where both administrators create the same user, and what should happen and how we could avoid this kind of situation. Most likely no one during the meeting will come up with a solution that everyone agrees to. So this will probably spawn new meeting and with probably architect or engineers that are going to work on the feature. But this is good because we found potential problem before it got implemented in our application. Okay, there are also other cards that we are not gonna share with you because they are specific to the teams and to the products that we work on. So analytics is included in the default deck, but we also have other cards that are not. We have internal system, just reminding people that there are different guidelines they need to follow, and this reminder is represented as physical card. We have a system for sharing knowledge between engineers, so if we are going to change something during feature development that is used by other teams, maybe it's a good idea to share that with others. We also have applications that work with feature flags, dark features, etc. So there is always a card reminding people that they need to look how things work with the feature flag on and feature flag off, that the data can be in different version. The schema can be in different version, and you also need to make sure that your feature works with different schema. We also have applications that work as data center, so basically with multiple nodes, and this also means that there are risks related to working in multiple nodes layout. And we have also applications that support zero downtime upgrades, so applications need to be operational as they are upgraded, and this also may cause some problems for particular feature. So some teams have this card in their decks to just remind them that there might be problems related to zero downtime upgrades. Also, we have like blank cards, and we just give them to teams so they can fill them if they have any other risks that are not reflected in available cards. Yeah, and the idea is simple. Like, we are just trying to remind people about different things with those cards, right? Maybe team doesn't need those cards. Maybe they like have engineers that remember everything, that know all those basic questions that you can ask, that know all the quality attributes that we care about. But if for some reason they want to remind themselves about different things, they can always grab a deck of cards. Those cards are in our meeting rooms, and just remind themselves what really matters. Okay, and just to do this in summary, this is usually how things look like after interrogation, after we try to uncover everything that is missing in the single page specification. And sometimes it can be overwhelming how much we don't know, how much we uncovered, how much is not on the initial specification, but that's good. And once we find all the answers to the questions from interrogation, we can then dive into details, whether those are like technical details related to architecture. We can look at every single element that's gonna be relevant for a feature, or whether they are relevant to domain. We basically are looking for problems on the lower level, and we do all of that in order to avoid this kind of situation where we think we know everything about a feature, but this is just theory. In practice, we don't. And once someone is asked to code it, they probably will end up with this kind of situation, right? Like uncover that we don't really know that much about a feature. Okay, thank you for participating. If you find those cards valuable, we have a few decks available, so just come and grab them. And yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed it. And as you hopefully seen, it's not that easy to use those cards for your own purpose in your own companies. Okay, thank you.
Actually, if you guys would like to stay for Slido questions, you can. I'm just telling you that now it's time for the big final talk. But actually, we do have a Slido question. Can we see that, please? Because that was a very interesting one. Okay, so are these all cards or just the set used during the conference? Do you have more cards, technically?
Yeah, we do have more cards. We have a lot of them. Like, as I said, like we have decks in every single conference room. We also have cards that we don't share publicly because they contain some details for applications that we work on. Okay. Yeah, and yeah, we do have.
And then feature kickoff answers questions and generates new ones. Do you repeat it with the new specification until all question is answered?
Yes, I mean, it depends. It depends on types of questions. Like we probably never have all the answers to all the questions, but if we think that we need answers to certain questions, we are gonna find someone who is going to get us those answers, or we are going to get those answers ourselves, but we will probably will need to discuss those answers with different people, and do the feature kickoff again, because potentially those answers could change the context and could generate more questions. So it's not very often, but I would say like 20% of times we have several feature kickoffs done iteratively.
And what kind of tests do you have at the end of the whole process, and who is implementing or executing them?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we don't have testers, and also as Jess Humble said, it's counterproductive to have a department or people responsible for acceptance tests. So engineers are responsible for acceptance tests. Basically, like the whole team is responsible for running those tests and to just proving that everything works according to expectations. And sometimes it can be a single engineer who is just making a change, or in the more complex situation, it can be like whole team just working together. Also, like when you make changes to a code base, it is expected from you to implement tests to those changes. And I'm not saying only like unit tests, but also any other types of tests like integration tests, acceptance tests, or even non-functional tests like performance tests.
Thank you very much.